The Mafia boss's wife insulted the pregnant black maid until she stood up to defend his child. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The grand ballroom was filled with laughter and music, a sea of champagne flutes clinking together as the wealthy elite mingled and enjoyed the luxurious evening. But amidst the opulence, one woman stood out, not in a sparkling gown or a lavish suit, but in a simple black maid's uniform. She was visibly pregnant, her hands shaking slightly as she served the guests at the lavish event. Naomi, the pregnant black maid, had always been invisible to those around her, a mere shadow in the background. But tonight, something was different. She had been working at the estate of the powerful Mafia boss, Dominic for nearly a year, and had never seen anything like the extravagant dinner party happening before her eyes. Guests from all over the city, dressed in the finest suits and gowns, were laughing and sipping wine, but Naomi remained on the edges, focusing only on her duties, keeping her head down as she moved through the room. That was until the wife of the Mafia boss, Isabella Vassallo, made her presence known. Isabella was a woman of immense beauty, draped in jewels that sparkled like diamonds under the lights, and yet her demeanor was cold, haughty, and dismissive. As she passed Naomi in the hallway, her eyes narrowed, and a sneer crept across her face. "Isn't it just precious," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "that the help gets pregnant? I wonder if she even knows who the father is." The room fell silent, the sound of laughter halting abruptly. Naomi froze, her hand gripping the tray tighter. She had heard these kinds of remarks before. The wealthy always found ways to make her feel small, unimportant. But this was different. This was public, a deliberate humiliation, meant to degrade her in front of the people who mattered most to Isabella. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to turn and run, to escape the ridicule. But something inside her, something fierce and protective for the child she carried, made her stand tall. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, watching to see if she would cower, just as they expected. But Naomi refused to back down. With a deep breath, she slowly lifted her head and met Isabella's gaze. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the fury bubbling inside her. "But you should know something. My child deserves respect, not your cruelty. And I'll defend that respect with everything I have." The crowd gasped, stunned by the audacity of her words. For a moment, there was silence, an uncomfortable, charged silence. Isabella's lips curled into a sneer, clearly not used to being challenged. But Naomi didn't back down. She stood her ground, her hands no longer trembling, her eyes filled with a strength that surprised even herself. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was defending the child she carried, a child who deserved better than to be mocked and humiliated. In that moment, Naomi knew something had shifted. She could feel the energy in the room change. Whispers started to spread, but Naomi didn't care. All that mattered was that she had stood up for what was right. She had found her voice. And the most unexpected part of it all, Mafia boss Dominic Vassallo, who had been watching silently from across the room, stepped forward. As the silence lingered in the room, Naomi could feel the weight of everyone's gaze. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time in her life, she had not been silent. Isabella Vassallo, the powerful Mafia boss's wife, stood frozen, her sneer faltering. Naomi, on the other hand, stood tall, her heart racing but her resolve stronger than ever. She had spoken out, and now there was no going back. The eyes of the room flickered between Naomi and Isabella, waiting for the next move. But it wasn't just Isabella who was watching. Dominic Vassallo, the Mafia boss himself, had been observing from across the room, his presence towering even in the chaos of the party. He had heard Naomi's words, and something in his expression shifted. The usual cold, calculating demeanor of the Mafia boss softened for just a moment, replaced by something Naomi couldn't quite place. But that fleeting moment was enough to spark something deep within her. Naomi took a deep breath and steadied herself. She wasn't afraid anymore. This was her moment to stand her ground, to defend herself and her unborn child. And as if on cue, Dominic stepped forward, cutting through the whispers and murmurs that had begun to swell in the room. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and she could feel the intensity of his gaze like a force pulling her closer. Naomi's breath hitched. She had no idea what to expect. Was he going to punish her for speaking out? She had no way of knowing, but she refused to back down. Enough! Dominic's voice was low, but commanding. The room immediately fell silent. Even Isabella, who had been poised to retaliate, seemed to shrink under the weight of her husband's voice. Dominic walked slowly toward Naomi, his every step measured, his presence undeniable. He stood before her, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other. Naomi's heart raced, but she held his gaze, refusing to look away. "You are no longer invisible," Dominic said, his voice softer than she expected, yet firm. Naomi blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You heard me." Dominic's eyes softened, just a touch, as if he was considering something deeply. "No one, especially you, should ever feel invisible. Not in my house." Naomi's mind raced. She wasn't sure if he was talking about the house she worked in, or something more. She had no idea what was going on in his mind, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. The tension was still thick, but there was a subtle shift. For the first time, Naomi felt seen. It wasn't just her fear or her struggle that had been acknowledged. It was her strength, her humanity. It wasn't just about the insult. It was about who she was and what she deserved. Dominic's gaze flickered to Isabella, who was now standing in stunned silence. "You will not disrespect her again," he said, his voice cold and final. Isabella's lips parted in disbelief. "Dominic, she's just a maid," she stammered. She is carrying my child's sibling," Dominic interrupted sharply. His words hit the air with the force of a storm. Naomi's stomach twisted, her heart pounding. At the sudden shift in the atmosphere, was he defending her? Dominic turned back to Naomi. "You are under my protection now. No one will harm you, and no one will ever make you feel small again. That is a promise." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say, what to feel. Everything had changed in an instant. She was used to being invisible, to being nothing more than a servant in the eyes of the world. But in that moment, Dominic Vassallo, the Mafia boss, had given her something she never expected: respect. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Dominic nodded, his eyes unwavering. "This is your home now. Do not forget that." And with that, he turned, walking away from her, but not without leaving her with one final glance. It was a glance that spoke volumes, one that said she was no longer a victim, but a woman who was worthy of dignity. The party, which had once felt so cold and distant, now seemed different. The people who had once looked at Naomi with disdain now glanced at her with something new: respect. The power in the room had shifted, and it wasn't because of money or status. It was because Naomi had stood up, and in doing so, she had earned something that no amount of wealth could buy: respect. As the night continued, Naomi couldn't help but feel a small, but undeniable spark of hope. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was valued. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. Something that, for the first time in her life, she could believe in. I have to admit, Naomi never expected things to change so dramatically. The evening that had started like any other, with the weight of her pregnancy and the usual glances of disdain, had transformed in an instant. Dominic Vassallo, the Mafia boss, had stepped in, and suddenly, she was no longer the invisible maid in the background. She was someone who mattered. The promise of protection had given her a sense of security she never thought she would experience. But even as she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope, she knew there was still much to face. As the evening continued, Naomi quietly went about her duties, her movements less hesitant, her posture straighter. The party was still in full swing, but it felt different now. People whispered amongst themselves, throwing furtive glances in Naomi's direction. Some of them, including the staff, seemed to be uncertain about how to treat her now. For the first time, she noticed a shift in their demeanor. They weren't treating her with the same dismissive attitude. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder if there was more respect to be gained. Isabella Vassallo, the Mafia boss's wife, however, was not so easily swayed. Naomi saw her from across the room, talking to a group of women, her face twisted in a mask of frustration. Isabella's eyes flicked toward Naomi, narrowing as she caught the subtle change in the air. Naomi held her gaze for a moment before looking away, not out of fear, but out of determination. She had faced worse insults before, but tonight was different. As the night wore on, Naomi found herself glancing toward Dominic. He was engaged in conversation with several guests, his demeanor still commanding. There was something about him, something that softened when he looked at her. Naomi hadn't imagined that someone like him, a man who commanded power, could look at her the way he did. It made her wonder what he was thinking. Was he doing this because of the child she carried? Or was it something else? Just as she was lost in thought, the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor interrupted her. Isabella Vassallo approached Naomi, her steps purposeful, her gaze cold. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that Isabella wouldn't let things go easily. You think you've won, don't you? Isabella's voice was low, dripping with venom. Naomi's eyes met hers, and for a moment, they were locked in a silent battle. She didn't respond, but the fire in her eyes was enough. Isabella scoffed, crossing her arms. You're nothing more than a servant. Don't think for a second that your little moment of courage changes anything, she spat. Naomi felt the sting of her words, but she refused to show any weakness. I'm not invisible anymore, Naomi said firmly, her voice steady. Isabella's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't press further. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked away, but not before casting one last glare in Naomi's direction. Naomi stood still. For a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had taken back some of the power she had lost over the years. The feeling of control was unfamiliar but exhilarating. Later that evening, as the party began to wind down, Naomi found herself standing near the edge of the room, trying to avoid the growing crowd. Her mind was racing, but there was a new sense of clarity. She had never felt more empowered, even if only for a brief moment. As she looked around the room, she saw Dominic Vassallo again, this time standing alone by the balcony. His gaze shifted to her, and for the first time, Naomi felt like there was more than just a professional distance between them. She slowly approached him, her heart racing as she crossed the room. Dominic watched her approach, and as she stood beside him, he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. You did well tonight, he said, his voice softer than before. Naomi was taken aback by his words. Thank you, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They both stood in silence, the hum of the party still buzzing in the background. The air between them felt different, charged with an unspoken understanding. Dominic's eyes softened as he turned to her. You don't have to be invisible, Naomi. Not here. Not with me, he said, his words lingering in the air. Naomi's chest tightened. For the first time, someone had acknowledged her worth. And for the first time, she believed it. I won't be, she said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. As they stood together, something shifted between them. Naomi didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just the maid. She was someone who mattered, and no one would take that away from her. I was not expecting to feel this way, Naomi thought to herself as she moved through the estate, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. The tension from the night before still hung in the air, but something about the way Dominic had looked at her had ignited a spark within her. She could no longer deny it. She wasn't just the maid. And she wasn't just carrying the child of a powerful man. Something had changed in her. For the first time, she was beginning to believe she had a place in this world, a place that wasn't defined by the role others expected her to play. But the reality of her situation still loomed large. She had to navigate a world that had always kept her on the outside, a world where her presence had always been a mere afterthought. And now, she was being thrust into the center of that world, a place she had never imagined she would occupy. Naomi continued her duties at the Vassallo estate, each day feeling different from the last. She wasn't sure if it was the growing weight of her pregnancy, or the way she walked with more confidence now, but things felt lighter. Even the other staff members seemed to treat her with a newfound respect. At first, she thought it was just a temporary shift, a result of the events of the night before. But as the days passed, it became clear that something had fundamentally changed. Even Isabella Vassallo, the Mafia boss's wife, began to act differently around Naomi. Her cold stares had become less frequent, and her dismissive comments were replaced by a cold, silent acknowledgement. It was as if the air had been cleared between them, though Naomi knew better than to think things were resolved. Isabella was a woman who didn't forgive easily. It was only a matter of time before the tension would resurface. It was on one of these quieter afternoons, when Naomi was alone in the kitchen, that she was approached by one of the estate's security guards. His name was Marco, a tall, broad-shouldered man who had been working for Dominic for years. He was intimidating at first, but Naomi had come to know him as a silent observer, someone who never said much, but always seemed to be aware of everything. Marco approached her cautiously, as if unsure of how to start. "Naomi," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Dominic wants to see you." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why he wanted to see her, but the fact that he had asked for her specifically made her nerves flare. She wiped her hands on the apron and nodded. "Of course," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Where is he?" Marco didn't say anything else, but gestured for her to follow. The hallway was dim, the air heavy with the sense that something important was about to happen. Naomi's mind raced as she followed him down the corridor, each step seeming to echo louder in her ears. They stopped outside Dominic's office, and Marco gave her a brief, almost unreadable look before knocking and opening the door. Dominic was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, his face as impassive as always. He looked up when Naomi entered, his expression unreadable, yet his gaze softened for a split second when he saw her. "Naomi," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Sit down." Naomi hesitated for just a moment before taking a seat across from him. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, and she tried to steady her breath. She had no idea what this meeting was about, but she could feel the tension building. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he studied her. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, the weight of the unspoken words between them growing heavier. "I've been watching you," Dominic said, breaking the silence. Naomi's stomach tightened at his words. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. "You've done well," he continued, his tone softer now. "You've proven yourself to be more than just a maid in this house. You're someone with strength, and that strength is something I respect." Naomi's heart raced. She had never heard Dominic speak to her like this before. His words were not just words of praise. They were an acknowledgement of her worth. She had been seen. "I want to offer you something," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "A position here, within the family. It's not just about being the help anymore. You would be treated as part of this family." Naomi was stunned. Her mind raced as she tried to process what he was saying. She had always been the outsider, always seen as less than. But now, Dominic was offering her something more, something she had never even dared to dream of. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm offering you a job," Dominic said, his eyes locking onto hers. "But more than that, I'm offering you a place here. You will have power, respect, and a voice. No more silence. No more being invisible." Naomi didn't know what to say. This was everything she had ever wanted, but it was also everything she had never believed she could have. She had always thought she was destined for a life of serving others, never imagining that someone like Dominic could see her as more than just a maid. But here he was, offering her a future she never thought possible. "I don't know what to say," Naomi replied, her voice thick with emotion. Dominic's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something vulnerable in him. "You don't have to say anything yet," he said. "Think about it. But know this offer stands. You have my word." Naomi sat there in stunned silence, her heart racing. She had come into this world with nothing, but now, Dominic Vassallo, the Mafia boss, had given her a chance at something she had never imagined. A chance at respect. A chance at a future. Naomi walked through the halls of the mansion, her mind racing with the words Dominic had spoken to her earlier. His offer, his words of respect, still echoed in her ears, leaving her feeling both overwhelmed and uncertain. It was a dream she had never dared to hope for, yet now it was within her grasp. She had always been just the maid, a background figure who was never seen, never heard. But now, Dominic had changed all of that. He had given her a chance at something different, something she never thought she could have. The thought of it was both exciting and terrifying. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, feeling like she was worth nothing more than the work she did. Now, Dominic was offering her a chance to be something more, someone who mattered. But there was a catch. She would have to walk into a world she had never been part of before, a world of power, wealth, and danger. It was one thing to be offered a place in that world, but it was another thing entirely to live in it, to navigate it, to survive it. Naomi knew she would have to make a decision. As she made her way to the kitchen, she found herself lost in thought. She wasn't sure what the right choice was. The security of this world, the safety it could provide, was tempting. But she also knew that it came with its own dangers, its own set of rules she had never agreed to. She had spent her life working for others, doing what they wanted, never questioning it. But now, she had the chance to make a choice for herself. She had the chance to take control of her own future. Just as she was about to reach the kitchen, she was stopped by a voice behind her. Naomi. Dominic's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. Naomi turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat. He was standing there, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on hers. "I want to make sure you understand what I'm offering you," he said, his tone low but firm. "This is more than just a position. It's a change in your life, a change that will affect everything. The choice is yours, but I need you to know that there's no turning back once you step into this world." Naomi swallowed, her throat dry. She knew what he was saying. This wasn't just a job. It was a life-altering decision. She would be stepping into a world of power, a world of danger, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. But something inside her pushed her forward, something that had been buried deep for so long. It was the desire for something more, the desire to be seen, to be valued. "I understand," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "But I need to know one thing." Dominic raised an eyebrow, his expression still unreadable. "What is it?" he asked, his voice softening slightly. "If I take this step, if I accept your offer, will I ever truly be free?" Naomi's question hung in the air between them, a question she had never dared to ask before. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense. He seemed to be considering her words carefully before he spoke. "Freedom isn't something that's handed to you," he said finally, his voice low. "It's something you take for yourself. But I can promise you one thing. If you're with me, you will never be alone. You'll have the support, the protection, and the respect you've always deserved." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. His words were both comforting and terrifying. She knew she would never be truly free in the way she once thought, but the idea of having someone to stand beside her, someone who saw her as more than just the help, was something she had never considered. "I want that," Naomi said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic nodded, as if he had expected that response. "Good," he said simply. "Then welcome to my world." Naomi felt a rush of emotions flood through her. She had made her choice. It wasn't an easy one, but it was hers. And as she looked into Dominic's eyes, she realized something. This was just the beginning. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to take control, to fight for the future she deserved. The world she was about to enter was one she had never imagined. But now that she was here, she was determined to carve out a place for herself. With Dominic by her side, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was Naomi, a woman with a future. And that future, for the first time in her life, was hers to decide. Naomi stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the sprawling estate that had become her new reality. The night sky stretched endlessly above her, but her thoughts were consumed by the decision she had made. A decision to step into a world that, until recently, she had only seen from the outside. A world of wealth, power, and danger. But as she looked at the estate, she no longer felt like an outsider. Dominic's words echoed in her mind, and she realized that for the first time, she felt like she belonged. The wind stirred her hair, and the cool air was a welcome change from the heaviness she had been carrying inside. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had a purpose, and for the first time in a long time, that purpose was her own. She had taken control of her future, but the future ahead wasn't going to be easy. She knew there were challenges ahead, challenges she couldn't even imagine. But Dominic had given her a chance. He had seen her for who she truly was, not just as the maid, but as a woman capable of more. She wasn't sure if she could live up to the expectations that came with being part of his world. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. She turned to see Marco, one of Dominic's most trusted security men, standing in the doorway. His expression was as neutral as always, but Naomi could sense the underlying tension in his posture. "Dominic wants to see you," Marco said, his voice low and calm. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what this meeting would entail, but she knew it was time to face whatever came next. She nodded and followed Marco down the hall, her footsteps echoing in the quiet mansion. As they reached Dominic's office, Naomi took a deep breath, steeling herself for the unknown. She had made the decision to join this world, but now she was about to experience it firsthand. The door opened, and Marco stepped aside, allowing Naomi to enter. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, his back straight, his gaze focused on a set of papers in front of him. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated his sharp features, and Naomi couldn't help but feel a rush of nerves. She had never imagined she would be standing here, in this room, facing this powerful man. "Naomi." Dominic's voice broke through the silence. His tone was steady, but there was an underlying intensity that made her feel both nervous and oddly safe. "Sit down." Naomi did as instructed, taking a seat across from him. She noticed the subtle shift in the room as soon as she sat down. The weight of the silence was palpable, and Naomi felt as though every decision she had made up until now had led her to this moment. "How are you feeling?" Dominic asked, his gaze meeting hers. Naomi hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm still adjusting," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm ready." Dominic nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good," he said. "This world isn't an easy one. It's full of dangers, full of people who will try to use you, control you. But if you're with me, I will protect you, and you will have the power to protect yourself." Naomi's heart raced. She had heard the rumors about Dominic Vassallo, about the Mafia empire he ran with an iron fist. She had always known there was power in his world, but hearing him speak of it directly made her realize just how deep this world ran. "I won't let anyone control me," Naomi said firmly, her voice strong. Dominic studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he gave a small nod. "I believe you," he said. "But there's more to this than just power. This is about loyalty, trust, and respect." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. "Are you ready for that?" Naomi didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. Dominic smiled slightly, though it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll see," he said quietly. "There are things you need to understand about this world, about the people in it. It's not just about following orders. It's about making your own decisions, building your own reputation, and earning the respect that comes with it." Naomi nodded, absorbing his words. She had always been the one to follow orders, to do what was asked of her without question. But now, for the first time, she was being asked to think for herself, to carve out a place in a world where respect was earned, not given. "I'm ready," she said again. "I'll prove it." Dominic's gaze softened slightly, and he sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk. "You'll have your chance," he said. "But remember this, your choices will define you. The path you choose, the people you trust, they will shape your future. So choose wisely." Naomi felt the weight of his words settle over her. She was no longer just the maid, no longer just a bystander in her own life. She was a player in a world that was as dangerous as it was powerful. And for the first time, she felt ready to take on whatever came next. As she stood to leave, Dominic's voice stopped her. "One more thing, Naomi," he said, his tone softer now. "You're not alone in this. You have me, and you have the family. Don't forget that." Naomi turned back to face him, a sense of determination welling up inside her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to fight for her place in it. "Thank you," she said quietly. And with that, she turned and left the room, her heart pounding with the promise of what was to come. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The world Dominic had introduced her to was like nothing she had ever known. Every day she spent at the Vassallo estate, she learned more about the world of wealth, power, and influence that she had always been on the outside of. But now, she was stepping into it, becoming a part of it. She had made a promise to herself that she would not let fear define her anymore, that she would take control of her life, no matter what it cost. But even as her confidence grew, she felt the weight of the decisions she was making. The Mafia world was not one she had ever imagined being a part of, but it was the world Dominic had built around him, and now, in some strange way, it was her world too. The more Naomi thought about it, the more she realized that her place in it was a double-edged sword. Yes, she had power now, real power, but with that power came responsibility. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a member of Dominic's household. She was expected to act, to make decisions, and to stand by him no matter the consequences. That thought weighed heavily on her mind as she moved through the halls of the mansion, a place that had once felt like a foreign land, now starting to feel like home. But as much as she had changed, as much as she had grown stronger, there were still moments that caught her off guard. Moments when the past would try to creep back in and remind her of who she had been. Just the help. Just the invisible woman carrying a child that no one cared about. She couldn't ignore it, not completely. The thought made her heart race as she walked through the mansion's garden, trying to clear her mind. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining brightly over the perfectly manicured lawn. The estate was stunning, a vast stretch of land that went on forever, filled with flowers, fountains, and towering trees. But Naomi couldn't focus on the beauty around her. All she could think about was the decision that loomed before her, the decision that would define her future. The next few days passed in a blur. Naomi had been spending more time with Dominic, learning the intricacies of his world and how to navigate it. He had kept his promise to her, giving her respect, giving her a place, and making sure she knew that she wasn't invisible anymore. But even with all the changes, the reality of it all still felt overwhelming. She had been working alongside the other staff members, and while they had begun to treat her differently, there was still a sense of distance between them. She had once been their equal, just another maid in the house. Now, she was someone different, someone more. The shift was subtle but undeniable. She could feel the tension in the air when she walked into a room. It wasn't malicious, but it was there, a strange energy that told her she was no longer part of the background. She was part of the story. One evening, as she was finishing her duties in the kitchen, Naomi heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his presence commanding as always. But there was something different in the way he looked at her, something softer, something more intimate. He gave her a small nod and walked into the room. Naomi's heart raced as she tried to keep her composure. "Naomi," Dominic said, his voice low, "I need to talk to you." His tone was serious, and Naomi immediately felt a wave of nerves wash over her. "Of course," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. She set down the dish she was holding and turned to face him. Dominic stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with a steady intensity. "I know this is all a lot to take in," he began, his voice calm but firm. "And I know you've already had to adjust to things that most people couldn't even begin to understand. But I need you to trust me when I say this. The decisions you make now, the way you handle yourself in this world, will determine everything. You're not just a maid anymore. You're part of this family, and that comes with its own set of rules." Naomi's chest tightened. She had been trying to adjust, to understand the weight of the world she had stepped into, but Dominic's words brought it all into sharp focus. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed herself. Dominic nodded slightly, his expression softening. "I believe you are," he said, "but there's more you need to understand. There will be times when you have to make tough decisions. There will be times when you'll have to choose between what's easy and what's right. And when that time comes, I need you to remember that you're not alone in this." Naomi took a deep breath. She hadn't realized how much she had feared being alone in all of this, how much she had doubted her own ability to navigate the challenges ahead. But hearing Dominic's words, feeling the sincerity in his tone, gave her the strength she needed to face the future. "I won't forget," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not alone." Dominic's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. It wasn't just about the position he had offered her. It was about something more, something deeper. He wasn't just offering her power and respect. He was offering her loyalty, protection, and a chance to create her own future. Naomi realized then that she wasn't just a part of his world. She was building her own place within it. And for the first time in her life, she felt ready to fight for that place, no matter what it took. Naomi walked through the grand hallway of the Vassallo estate, the weight of her decision still hanging heavily in the air. Each step felt like a confirmation of the choice she had made to accept Dominic's offer. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized there was no turning back. She had committed herself to this new world, a world of power, loyalty, and responsibility that she had never imagined for herself. Yet as much as she feared the unknown, she felt a sense of anticipation building inside her. This was the life she had been waiting for, the life she deserved, the life she would fight to create for herself and for her child. It had been a few weeks since that pivotal conversation with Dominic, and Naomi had already begun to step into the role he had offered her. She had been given more responsibility around the estate, becoming more involved in the operations and decisions that shaped the day-to-day life of the Vassallo household. At first, the other staff members were hesitant to acknowledge the change in Naomi's position. They were used to seeing her as the help, as the one who worked in the background, invisible to the eyes of the family and the guests. But now, Naomi was becoming a fixture in the Vassallo household, no longer just a maid, but an integral part of the family's operations. As she continued to rise within the household, Naomi began to feel the weight of her newfound status. She was no longer just serving food or cleaning rooms. She was making decisions, helping to shape the environment around her. And while this new role came with a sense of pride, it also brought challenges. There were those who resented her presence, those who were not ready to accept her as part of the Vassallo family. But Naomi was undeterred. She had learned that she needed to command respect, not beg for it. And with each passing day, she grew more confident in her role. But it wasn't just about the respect she gained from the other staff members. It was about the bond she was building with Dominic. Over time, their relationship had shifted from one of employer and employee to something more complex. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a recognition of the power they both held. Dominic had never treated her as just a maid, and in return, Naomi had never seen him as just a mafia boss. They were both playing a game in a world where power and loyalty were everything, and Naomi was beginning to understand the rules. One evening, after a long day of work, Naomi was sitting in her room when there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Marco standing there, his usual stoic expression softened slightly. "Dominic wants to see you," he said, his voice calm. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had been spending more time with Dominic lately, but there was something different in his tone tonight. She followed Marco down the familiar hallway, her nerves starting to creep in. As they reached Dominic's office, Marco opened the door, and Naomi stepped inside. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, his back straight, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "Naomi," he said, his voice steady. "Come in. We need to talk." Naomi nodded and took a seat across from him. She had no idea what this meeting would be about, but she could feel the weight of it in the air. "I've been watching you," Dominic said, his tone quiet, but intense. "You've done well. You've adjusted to this world more quickly than I expected. But I need to know something." Naomi's heart raced, her mind working overtime to figure out where this conversation was heading. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Are you ready for what comes next? Because this world doesn't stop. There's always something more, always another move to make. And you have to be prepared to make it." Naomi felt the gravity of his words. She had already come so far, but this world was never static. There would always be challenges, always be people to face, decisions to be made. "I'm ready," she said, the words coming out with more conviction than she felt. Dominic's eyes softened just slightly, as though he were assessing her, considering her words. After a moment, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I know you are," he said, his voice quieter now. "But this is a dangerous game. You're not just part of my household anymore. You're part of the family. That means you'll have to make choices, hard choices. People will test you. They'll try to use you. And you need to be ready for that." Naomi nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. She had known it was coming. She had known that her place in this world would require more from her than she had ever given before. "I've been preparing for this," she said, her voice steady. "I know what I'm getting into." Dominic studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good," he said, "because from here on out, there's no turning back. But I trust you. I trust you to make the right decisions." Naomi felt a surge of emotion at his words. She wasn't just another employee to him anymore. She wasn't just a woman carrying his child. She was someone he trusted, someone he believed in. And that meant everything to her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. Dominic gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. You've earned it, he said simply. Now, let's move forward. As Naomi left the office, she felt the weight of the responsibility ahead of her, but she also felt something else, something powerful. She was no longer just surviving in this world. She was thriving. And she was ready for whatever came next. Naomi stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at her reflection with a mix of disbelief and determination. The woman staring back at her was not the same one who had walked into the Vassallo estate months ago. She was no longer just the maid, no longer the one who silently carried out orders. She had become something more, someone with purpose, someone who had earned her place in a world that once seemed out of reach. The dress she wore was an elegant, deep emerald green, tailored to fit her perfectly. She had never imagined herself in something like this, especially in the Vassallo mansion, surrounded by luxury that had always felt so distant. But now, as she adjusted the delicate fabric, she understood why Dominic had asked her to wear it. Tonight was important. Tonight, her role in the family would solidify. She wasn't just a spectator anymore. She was a participant. The gala, the grand event where all of New York's elite would gather, was Dominic's world. This was where power was on display, where the decisions made behind closed doors were revealed for all to see. And tonight, Naomi would walk beside Dominic, not as his maid, but as a partner in his world. The soft knock on the door pulled Naomi from her thoughts. She turned and found Marco standing there, his expression as neutral as ever. He's ready for you, Marco said, his voice calm. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this moment, but she was about to face it. She had come so far, and now, as she walked toward the door, she felt the weight of everything she had learned and experienced since arriving at the Vassallo estate. As she entered the hallway, Dominic was already waiting by the staircase, dressed in a sharp black suit that emphasized his commanding presence. His dark eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, there was nothing else in the world but the two of them. You look stunning, he said, his voice soft but genuine. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She had always felt invisible, always felt like she was nothing more than a servant. But standing before Dominic now, she realized that in his eyes, she was something more. She wasn't just the woman carrying his child. She was someone who could stand beside him. Thank you, Naomi replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Dominic offered her a small smile before offering his arm to her. Without a word, they descended the staircase together, and as they reached the bottom, Naomi's gaze swept across the room. The mansion's grand ballroom was alive with chatter and music. Guests in elegant attire swirled around, exchanging pleasantries and whispers, each one vying for attention in a world of power and influence. Naomi could feel the eyes of the room on them as she and Dominic entered, but she didn't flinch. She held her head high, her posture strong. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was someone who belonged here. As they made their way through the crowd, Naomi couldn't help but notice the way people looked at her now. There were whispers, yes, but they were different. They weren't filled with disdain. Instead, they were filled with curiosity, respect. She had earned that respect, and it felt powerful. But there was one person who wasn't so easily fooled by her new position, Isabella. Naomi spotted her across the room, standing by a group of high-profile guests. Isabella's eyes locked onto hers, a flash of anger crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a tight smile. Naomi knew that Isabella would never accept her new place in this world. But it didn't matter anymore. Naomi was here to stay, and she wasn't going anywhere. As the night wore on, Naomi found herself standing beside Dominic, engaged in conversation with some of the guests. It wasn't long before Isabella approached them, her smile forced but polite. "Dominic," she said, her voice smooth, but there was an edge to it. "How lovely to see you. And Naomi, you're looking different tonight." Naomi met her gaze, unflinching. "Thank you, Isabella," she replied, her voice calm, her smile warm but guarded. Isabella's eyes flickered with a mix of irritation and disbelief. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said, her words dripping with sarcasm. "For what?" Naomi asked, her tone even, her gaze never leaving Isabella's. "For becoming part of the family, of course," Isabella replied with a tight smile. "I'm sure you'll fit in just fine." Naomi knew this was Isabella's way of testing her, of trying to undermine her confidence. but she wasn't about to let Isabella take control of this moment. I'm not trying to fit in, Naomi said, her voice steady and sure. I'm here because I belong. There was a brief pause, and Naomi could see the flicker of surprise in Isabella's eyes. For a moment, it seemed like Isabella didn't know how to respond. But then, with a cold laugh, she turned away. Naomi didn't let it bother her. She had no intention of playing Isabella's games. As the evening came to a close, Dominic turned to Naomi, his eyes soft. You did well tonight, he said, his voice filled with approval. Naomi smiled, the weight of the evening finally lifting. Thank you, she replied, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. As they left the ballroom together, Naomi realized that this was just the beginning. She had stepped into a world she never thought she could be a part of, and now, she was ready to make her mark. With Dominic by her side, there was no limit to what she could achieve, and she was determined to make the most of the opportunity she had been given. No longer invisible, no longer the outsider, Naomi had found her place, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away from her. Naomi stood in the middle of the lavish office, the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. Dominic had asked her to join him here, but the conversation was different this time. She had been walking in his shadow for months now, adjusting to a world that had never been hers. But tonight it felt like something was shifting, like the invisible line that had separated them was slowly disappearing. Dominic stood by the window, his back to her, staring out over the estate as if lost in thought. Naomi couldn't help but study him. There was always something magnetic about him. The way he carried himself with absolute authority, yet there was a certain vulnerability in him, a softness that only she had started to see. He had been distant lately, preoccupied with the family business, and Naomi had felt it, the space growing between them. She hadn't asked for it, but it was there, lingering, and it made her wonder if she had really earned her place in his world. She had been given a position, respect, and opportunities she never dreamed of, but there was still that question. Was she truly a part of this family? Naomi, Dominic's voice broke the silence, his tone low but steady. She looked up, meeting his gaze as he turned toward her. Come here, he said, gesturing for her to approach. Naomi walked toward him, her heart beating a little faster. Something was different tonight. She could feel it in the air, and she knew this conversation would be important. I've been thinking about you, Dominic began, his eyes locking onto hers. And I know it hasn't been easy for you to step into this world. The power, the expectations, it's all a lot to carry, I understand. Naomi's chest tightened. It had been hard, harder than she had anticipated, but she didn't want to show weakness. I can handle it, she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Dominic studied her for a moment before stepping closer. He reached out and touched her arm, the warmth of his touch sending a jolt through her. I know you can, he said, his voice softer. But there's more to this than just being strong. I need you to understand something. Naomi met his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. She felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability, like the layers she had carefully built around herself were beginning to peel away. What do you need me to understand? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a depth she hadn't seen before. You've earned your place here. Not because of what you can do for me, but because of who you are. You're part of this family now, Naomi, and that means something. More than you think. Naomi's breath hitched. She had always felt like an outsider, like she was only tolerated in this world, but Dominic's words hit her like a wave of warmth. I've given you power, respect, and a place within this world, he continued, his voice low and intense. But there's something I haven't given you. Naomi's mind raced. She couldn't understand what he meant. Hadn't he already given her everything? What haven't you given me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic's gaze softened, and he stepped even closer. I haven't given you my trust, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't realized how much she had wanted that, how much she had wanted to feel like she wasn't just a pawn in his world, but someone who mattered, someone he trusted. I trust you with everything, Dominic said, his voice rough, raw. And I need you to know that. This family, this life, it's yours as much as it is mine. But you have to trust me, too. You have to believe that you belong here, that you are not just the help, not just someone carrying my child. You are a part of everything. You've always been a part of this. Naomi's chest tightened, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so much of her life believing that she was invisible, that she didn't matter. And now, standing here, with Dominic's words hanging in the air, she realized how much she had needed to hear them. I trust you, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Dominic's eyes softened, and he stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers. Then let's move forward together, he said, his voice steady. Naomi nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and something else, something she couldn't quite name. But it was there, growing inside her, filling the spaces that had once felt so empty. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. Dominic gave her a small smile, the kind of smile that made her feel like she could do anything. I know you are, he said. Naomi felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had earned her place in this world, and it was time to stop doubting herself. She wasn't just here because of the baby she carried. She wasn't just here because Dominic had given her a position. She was here because she had fought for this, fought for a future that was hers to create. And with Dominic by her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges came next. Together, they would build something strong, something that would last. Naomi wasn't just a part of this world. She was a force in it, and nothing could take that away from her. Naomi stood on the balcony of the mansion, the cool evening air brushing against her face as she gazed out over the sprawling estate. The city lights flickered in the distance, a constant reminder of the world beyond these walls. But tonight, Naomi was no longer just a part of that distant world. She had stepped into a new life, one filled with power, danger, and an uncharted future. It had been months since she had accepted Dominic's offer, months since she had made the decision to become more than just a maid. But now, standing in the quiet of the night, she realized how far she had come. Her life had changed completely, and though the world around her still seemed foreign at times, she no longer felt like an outsider. The respect she had earned, the position she held, all felt real. But there were still doubts in her mind. Doubts that she pushed aside during the day, but that crept into her thoughts when the world was quiet. Was she truly ready for what lay ahead? Was she truly a part of Dominic's world, or was she just another piece in his empire? These questions lingered, but Naomi was no longer the woman who cowered in the shadows. She had made the decision to stand tall, to fight for her place in this world. And as she watched the lights of the city twinkle in the distance, she knew she had to keep moving forward, no matter the uncertainty. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts. She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his presence unmistakable. He had been quieter than usual lately, lost in the endless responsibilities that came with running his empire. Naomi had felt the distance between them, but she didn't let it show. He had given her a place in his world, and she would prove that she belonged there. Naomi, Dominic said, his voice steady. We need to talk. Naomi's heart raced. She had been waiting for this moment, knowing it was inevitable. The time had come to confront the future, to confront the life she was building. What's on your mind? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Dominic stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that left her breathless. You've done well. I've watched you grow, watched you take control of your life here. But there's something more I need to tell you. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding. She had learned to listen when Dominic spoke. He wasn't one for idle words. This life is not for everyone, he continued. It requires more than just strength. It requires sacrifice, loyalty, and the ability to make decisions that can change everything. And the decisions you'll face will be hard. Naomi felt the weight of his words. She had known this from the beginning, but hearing it from Dominic, the man who had given her this world, made it all feel more real. She wasn't just living in this world. She was now responsible for navigating it, for making choices that could affect not only her future, but the future of everyone she cared about. I understand, she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the pressure building inside her. Dominic studied her for a long moment before speaking again. Good, he said, his voice softer now. But you need to know something else. The people around you, the ones who've helped you, they're not always going to have your back. Not everyone is trustworthy, Naomi. You need to learn who to trust and who to keep at a distance. Naomi's mind raced. She had already encountered the resentment and the cold stares from some of the staff. But Dominic's words made it clear that there was more at play here. This was not just about loyalty, it was about survival. In this world, Trust could be a dangerous thing. I know, Naomi replied. I've seen how it works here. I'm learning. Dominic gave her a small smile, his gaze softening just a fraction. I know you are. But there will be moments when you'll have to choose. Choose between loyalty and ambition, between power and morality. And when those moments come, you need to be ready to make them without hesitation. Naomi nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what Dominic was saying. She had always known that her life in this world wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from Dominic made it all the more real. She was being thrust into a world where every decision mattered, where every move she made had consequences. I won't let you down, she said quietly, the words holding more weight than she had intended. Dominic's eyes softened as he stepped closer. I know you won't. But remember this world is never just black and white. There will be times when the right choice isn't clear, and that's when you'll need to trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Naomi felt a sense of clarity settle over her. She had been living in uncertainty for so long, never knowing if she truly belonged. But now, with Dominic's words, something shifted inside her. She wasn't just a player in his world. She was a force in her own right. She would navigate this world on her terms. She would make the tough choices, the ones that defined who she was. And she would not let anyone take that away from her. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. Dominic nodded, his eyes filled with approval. You're ready, he said simply. Naomi stood there for a moment, the weight of the future pressing down on her. But for the first time, she felt ready to face it. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was a woman who had earned her place, and she would fight to keep it. And with Dominic by her side, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. Naomi had spent the past few weeks adjusting to her new life. But tonight, as she walked down the grand hallway of the Vassallo estate, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change again. The night was unusually still, and the mansion felt quieter than usual, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She had come a long way since the first time she had set foot in this house, when she had felt like an invisible, unimportant servant. Now, she was a part of it, a real part. But as the days had passed, she had realized that being part of Dominic's world came with a cost, and that cost was something she couldn't yet fully understand. Dominic had been distant lately, his attention divided between the demands of the family business and his growing trust in Naomi. But Naomi could feel the weight of his expectations, the quiet pressure of the world he had asked her to step into. The respect she had earned, the responsibility she carried. Those were things that changed her, things that shaped her. But the deeper she became involved, the more she realized that this world was not as it seemed. There were hidden dangers, secrets that she hadn't been fully prepared for. As Naomi reached the door to Dominic's office, she paused, her hand resting on the handle. She had been summoned by him, as always, but tonight felt different. She had been summoned for a purpose. She knew it. The conversation they would have tonight would mark the next step in their journey together, and Naomi was ready. She took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into the room. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, his posture as commanding as always. But his eyes, those dark eyes that had once seemed distant, now locked onto her with something deeper, something unreadable. Come in, Naomi, Dominic said, his voice steady. We need to talk. Naomi nodded, walking into the room and standing before him. The weight of his gaze was intense, but she didn't look away. What's on your mind? She asked, her voice calm, but with an undercurrent of anticipation. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he studied her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, and Naomi felt the tension grow. Finally, Dominic broke the silence. You've done well, Naomi, he said, his voice low and steady. You've shown loyalty, strength, and resilience. And you've earned my trust. But there's something more I need to make clear. Naomi felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had suspected this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to feel so heavy. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You've been rising in the ranks here, Dominic said, his tone measured. You've gained respect, not just from me, but from everyone in the house. But I need you to understand something. Respect isn't given freely in this world. It's earned, and once you've earned it, it can easily be taken away. Naomi's chest tightened as she listened to him. She had already learned the hard way that the world she was now part of was one of power and danger, But hearing Dominic say it so plainly sent a chill down her spine. You've been given the power to make decisions, he continued, his gaze never wavering. But with that power comes responsibility. You'll be tested, Naomi. And when you're tested, I need you to stand firm. Naomi nodded, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on her ability to adapt, to survive. But the stakes were higher now. The decisions she made would affect not only her future but the future of those she cared about. Dominic's gaze softened just slightly, as though he could sense the weight of her thoughts. I'm not giving you this power to test you, he said. I'm giving it to you because I believe you can handle it. But the road ahead won't be easy. There will be people who will try to use you, people who will try to manipulate you, and you'll have to decide how to deal with them. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She had known this day would come. She had known that stepping into this world meant confronting the darkness that lurked behind its shiny facade. But hearing it from Dominic, hearing him say it so bluntly, made it all feel so real. What happens if I make the wrong choice? Naomi asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something intense passing over his face. The wrong choice can cost you everything, he said. And it can cost the people around you. Naomi felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight of Dominic's words was overwhelming. She had always believed she was strong enough to survive, but now she realized the price of survival in this world was much higher than she had anticipated. I'm ready, Naomi said, her voice stronger now, more certain. I'll do whatever it takes to protect this family, to protect the people I care about. Dominic's expression softened, and for the first time, Naomi saw a flicker of pride in his eyes. I know you will, he said, and that's why I'm counting on you. But remember this, there's no turning back once you commit. The world we live in doesn't give second chances. Naomi nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But for the first time, she understood what it meant to be a part of this world. It wasn't just about loyalty. It was about strength, about making choices in the face of danger, and about standing by the people who mattered. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady. Dominic gave her a small smile, one that reached his eyes. I know you won't, he said quietly. Naomi stood there for a moment, the weight of the future pressing down on her. She had made her choice. There was no turning back, but she was ready. And with that resolve, she turned to leave the room, knowing that the world ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But whatever happened, she would face it head on. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Naomi stood at the window of the Vassallo estate, looking out over the sprawling grounds as the early morning light cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. The world outside was peaceful, but Naomi knew that peace in this world was fleeting. She had learned that lesson well. The mansion, with its luxurious interiors and endless corridors, had once seemed like a distant dream. But now, it was her reality. She had come so far, and yet, the weight of the world she had entered still loomed over her. Dominic's words echoed in her mind, reminding her that there was no turning back. The choices she made now would shape everything. She had been given a place in his world, a seat at the table, but it wasn't just about power or status. It was about loyalty, trust, and the unspoken bond they shared. Naomi had always thought she could survive alone, but now she understood that survival in this world required more than just strength. It required knowing when to stand firm and when to trust. She had learned to navigate the complex, dangerous world of the Vassallo family, and with each passing day, she grew more confident in her role. But as much as she had gained, she had also lost pieces of herself along the way. The constant pressure, the weight of decisions that could change everything, had taken a toll on her. Naomi knew she couldn't keep moving forward without making peace with her past, without truly understanding what she had become. She had fought so hard to be seen, to be valued, to be part of something that mattered. But in doing so, she had lost sight of who she had been before. She was no longer just the maid. She was no longer just the woman carrying Dominic's child. She was someone who had made a place for herself in a world that had never meant to accept her. But now, standing at the window, Naomi realized that the journey was far from over. She still had to confront the choices that would define her future. Dominic had trusted her, had given her power and respect, but in return, she had to prove herself worthy of it. It wasn't enough to simply belong to this world. She had to shape it. The door behind her opened softly, and Naomi turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway. His eyes were filled with a quiet intensity, a look that told her he had been watching her. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice low and steady. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a pang of vulnerability. He could always read her better than she could read herself. "I'm just trying to make sense of everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a lot at stake." Dominic stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. "I know," he said softly, his voice full of understanding. "And you're handling it better than most could. But you need to stop carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders alone. You don't have to prove anything to me." Naomi looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "What if I make the wrong choice?" Dominic reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch warm and steady. "Then you learn," he said quietly. "You learn and you move forward. But you don't do it alone. Not anymore." Naomi felt the weight in her chest lift as she looked into his eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear or doubt. She felt a glimmer of hope, of possibility. Dominic had given her the space to grow, to become someone she never thought she could be. But he had also given her something more, his trust, his loyalty, and a chance to build something real together. Naomi's hand found his, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to matter. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet of the morning, knowing that they were in this together. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with determination. "I'm ready to take this on. Whatever comes next." Dominic smiled, his gaze softening. "I know you are," he said, his voice full of pride. "And I'm with you, every step of the way." Naomi took a deep breath, the air around her feeling clearer than it had in a long time. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was hers to shape. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had found her place in this world, and with Dominic by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges came her way. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, and nothing would take that from her. Together, they would build a future based on trust, loyalty, and the strength they both shared. Naomi wasn't just a part of Dominic's world anymore. She was creating her own, one step at a time, and she was ready for whatever came next. Immerse yourself in the captivating world of passion and power with this intense and emotional journey. Follow Naomi, a woman who rises from the shadows of servitude to become an integral part of a powerful family. As her relationship with Dominic, a Mafia boss, grows stronger, Naomi faces challenges that test her loyalty, courage, and self-worth. Filled with moments of heart-stopping decisions and deep connections, this story will take you on a roller coaster of emotions. The world Naomi steps into is one of high stakes, but the love and respect she gains along the way proves that even in the darkest of worlds, there is light. For fans of romance stories with twists and turns, this narrative brings a thrilling combination of intrigue and heart. As Naomi learns the price of power and loyalty, she discovers that her heart belongs to more than just Dominic. It's tied to the future she is creating. If you love romance stories that blend strength, vulnerability, and powerful transformations, this tale will leave you hooked. Naomi's journey is one of overcoming fear and embracing trust, and the romance stories that unfold prove that true love is about more than just attraction. Don't miss the next chapter in this emotional saga where Naomi and Dominic prove that love is the strongest force of all. Dive into romance stories that show how powerful and life-changing love can truly be.